Great. Well, I'll just get started. It's so lovely to be here. If you could see me, you would see me waving at you with a big smile on my face. Uh, I've I've never done a webinar before, so it's really funny to talk out into the air. So I hope this you're all used to it by now. But let me know if I can slow down or talk more loudly or talk more quietly at any point. So let me go ahead and get started. I'll just give you a little background. I am, as Stephen said, I'm working at the University of Michigan School of Social Work, and I'm the Curriculum and Instructional Technology Coordinator. So that means that I handle general issues related to curriculum design and development. And I was hired because I had been spending a couple of years doing portfolio implementation campus-wide, mostly for undergraduates in academic and in co-curricular student affairs settings. And the project that I worked on was really born in the School of Social Work several years ago. And so they brought me on at a point at which they wanted to scale portfolio development throughout the school. And both for the purposes of, for pedagogical purposes, because it's a really popular program, but also because we're coming up for CSWE accreditation in 2015 and wanted to be able to use the data that we collect from portfolios as an assessment measure for our self-study. So, oops, I'm sorry. Okay. So what I'm going to do today is give a general overview of how portfolios were developed within our program at Social Work, and then talk a little bit about the pedagogical approach that we use with students to develop portfolios. Then I'll talk about how we're actually implementing it, kind of what's the on-the-ground experience for students, and how we're planning to scale this project to become program-wide for all MSW students. I'll spend a little bit of time giving some examples of two portfolios of MSW students who graduated, and then show a couple of examples of some of the assignments that we use to help students actually create these portfolios. Okay. So just to give a kind of overview of how this began, I mean, this all happened long before I came on board. I just started at the School of Social Work last July. But as I understand it, in 2001, the School of Social Work began implementing what's called integrative learning opportunities into the curriculum, both throughout the field and in coursework. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking a couple of slides later about what integrative learning really is, because that really kind of undergirds the pedagogical process that students go through in developing portfolios. So I'll have time to explain what that means. In 2004, the school actually piloted a course, a one-credit mini course for MSW students who are graduating to walk them through the process of developing a professional portfolio for the purposes of seeing how they make meaning of the experience they have in their program, as well as helping them prepare for the professional practice of social work, but also just getting a job, for instance, helping them prepare to be able to articulate what it is that they learned. So since 2004, we've had a course every semester that hits about 20 to 25 students that are just co-taught by a team of faculty, an associate professor, as well as the director of the field office. So they really thought intentionally about having a space where coursework and fieldwork were both addressed through the faculty and therefore for the students. In 2010, the School of Social Work launched a social change minor for undergraduates within the literature, science, and arts programs, the general liberal arts part of the University of Michigan curriculum. It's housed within LS&A, so students take classes all over campus that relate to social change and community action. But there's a capstone course launched in 2010 where students develop final portfolios to demonstrate how they have come to develop their own interdisciplinary program within using the concepts of social change and social justice. So portfolios were piloted with the undergrads in 2010. And bringing us to now, we're now developing this pilot to increase the access to portfolio development from 20 to 25 students who enroll up to the 700 students who are enrolled in the social work program, in the Masters of Social Work program at any given time. So we're starting that right now. We'll be piloting the plan in 2012 and having full implementation in 2013 in order to collect data for our self-study in 2014. So I'm going to talk a little bit about integrative learning to give you kind of basically I want to make sure that the glossary of terms is clear so that I can then talk about the portfolios themselves. So integrative learning essentially addresses a series of questions around these concepts. The first is that you are identifying your tacit knowledge. So as you're going through life collecting experiences, across context, what are the skills and knowledge that you develop in those different contexts? How do you then surface the values and belief systems that guide your decisions? And then how do you take that knowledge and see how it applies from one context to another, with the end result that you can then apply this knowledge into future situations? So I've listed out some questions here that I think help kind of flesh out those categories. So we ask students to think about what and how they're learning, where they're learning, what skills they develop and where, and how do they begin to make their tacit knowledge explicit. What are the values and beliefs that underlie their decisions and goals? How do they see their learning connected across contexts? Specifically, how do they take some skills learned in, for instance, the field, and then apply those to their practice in the future? Or how does knowledge that they develop in courses actually affect how they then practice in the field? And finally, what will they do with all of this knowledge going forward? How does this help them articulate the kinds of goals that they want to set out for themselves, the kinds of professional paths that they want to take? And we call these professional portfolios, but we like to think of them as more than just professional, but rather, more broadly personal, personal being something that might encompass your professional experiences. So within the context of social work, we summarize it essentially as asking students to make links between the course content and their field practice, and then also connecting those two things to their development as professionals in the future. So I'll talk a little bit about portfolios themselves. So to continue with the glossary of terms idea, so if we think about a portfolio as a collection of artifacts or evidence of learning that showcases one's knowledge, skills, and capacities for a public audience, a portfolio in that definition answers this question: what did I learn? What have I done? What we're trying to do is take that a step further with the notion that an integrative knowledge portfolio showcases not only the isolated, siloed experiences that you have, here are the different things I do in these places, but actually how do you take that learning from one context to another? And then how do you develop an actual portfolio, a product where you can tell a story about how different things connect to each other? So we think of those portfolios as answering the questions: how did I learn and why is it important? So looking at the process by which a student might create a portfolio, I like to describe it as a student is answering the questions: what, so what, and now what? So I think of what as the key learning experiences that you've had in your past up till now. So what is the meaningful work that you've done? How do you begin to make meaning of that work and understand what it is that you developed and why it was important? The so what being, so what does that tell you about the values that you have and the motivations that you have? What are the connections across that work, and how do they connect to a larger value system? And that being kind of your present philosophy. How do you operate on a day-to-day basis? And how does that philosophy then shape what you do in the future? What kinds of goals do you make because of the values that you have? How does that tell you what kind of placement you want to have, what kind of social work you want to do, what populations you want to work with, what social issues you want to address? So that's the kind of the future orientation. And I use the what, so what, now what mechanism a lot because I think it both relates to it's what a portfolio answers. It answers what, so what, and now what, but also the individual components of a portfolio really get at those questions. And I'll talk a little bit now about those individual components. So the first, I think of the backbone of the portfolio is what we call artifact summaries. So an artifact, broadly defined as is evidence of learning. It could be an experience that you have, a document that you create, a paper that you write, a policy brief, a clinical intervention plan that you create, a group session that you do. There are all kinds of things where you actually are producing something, either experientially or tangibly. And so an artifact summary, which is what shows up in the portfolio, is a reflection on why that was important and what you got out of it. And the way we describe that to somebody is, what's the purpose of that summary? Why are you doing that? And that is so that you can articulate, what you've done, how you did it, and why it's important that you have this knowledge so that you can apply it to another context or to a future context. The elements, the way that we divide an artifact summary essentially covers these 4 areas, and you'll see the what, so what, and now what again. So first we have students articulate essentially this is like the elevator speech. What's the significance of this experience? If you had to tell me in one paragraph or in 1 minute, why is this meaningful to you? And then we break down to say what. So what did you do? What did you actually get done in this experience, and what skills were required or employed in order to accomplish that work? What challenges did you face, and what did you actually, how did you operate in order to get through those challenges? And that's really where the tacit knowledge comes in, is that we're trying to get students to think about the ways in which they approach situations without even realizing the knowledge that they're bringing or the instincts that they're bringing, articulate those, and then with that articulation, then be able to say, oh, I possess the skill, I can now use it somewhere else. And that goes to the third component of an artifact summary, which is, so why does this matter? Why do you need this information? How does it help you? And the fourth component, again, being now what? How is that knowledge going to shape the way that you move forward in the world? What goals will you do? What goals have you set now because of this work? Or what decisions have you made because of this work and its impact on you? The other pieces of the portfolio are a philosophy statement and a professional use of self statement, and these two are related. The philosophy statement is an articulation of your values and beliefs. So as you look at all of the different artifact summaries that you create, what do you see as the pattern? So do you find that you're very interested in a particular social justice issue? Well, why is that? And what's the belief developed, and how did that develop? And then how do you explain those values with actual illustrated lived experiences, so that essentially the philosophy statement answers the question, what are you for, what do you stand for, and how do you know? So that's the kind of iterative process that we ask students to go through to develop their philosophy statement. And then the professional use of self-statement is a kind of like a further articulation of it. It's how would those values actually show up in your professional practice? What's your approach or your brand in social work? How do you approach the profession? How would you approach a client? Some of the questions that the faculty who teach this course use are, how would you be remembered as a social worker? How do you engage clients giving feedback? What kind of impact do you have? How do you want to leave the place when you leave it? So let me get out of the PowerPoint just to show you, just to give you a visual of what some of these portfolios look like. So I'm going to give you the links to these 2 portfolios at the end. You have time to look through them, so forgive me if I go through them quickly. I'm also happy to return to them. But so let me just give you a brief overview here. So you're looking at an MSW student who just graduated, and her portfolio is split into a page, a philosophy page, the work showcase, which is where all of her summaries are, and then her contact and resume. So she chose to actually put her own artwork into the portfolio, which is another wonderful piece of the portfolio process, is that students really get to personalize and showcase kind of multiple talents and the ways that they visually communicate. So the way that her work showcase is laid out is she talks about the themes that show up in the work that she's done as an MSW student, and both in a program and outside of it. And then each of these links at the left is an example of an artifact summary. Here you'll see that she has written about her work with sex workers and advocating for this group and giving them resources, connecting them to resources within the county. So she describes the project at the top, talks about why it's important and what the goals were. And then as I scroll down, you'll see that she outlines the skills that she's gained and then the lessons that she's learned. So she talks about, the importance of communication with organizational partners, and then it illustrates that with a particular example of how that ended up being very important. She also chose to embed photographs and a logo and that kind of thing, which is another wonderful thing that you can do in a portfolio. So you'll see that these are all very similar in format, where she talks about lessons, skills, and importance. And her philosophy page is, it's pretty short. It's probably one page in Microsoft Word, and it allows her to kind of talk about how she approaches her work. I'll skip over really quickly to the other portfolio. So Lisa Arthur, who we just looked at, was a macro community organizing student, and Amanda was the one we're looking at now. She was an interpersonal practice or clinical practice specialization. So similarly, she's got her work showcase. She's got an overview to help you understand what the themes are that she's demonstrating. And she shows, for instance, a couple of different assessment pages. So she talks again about the importance, the goals, the skills that she developed, and then the lessons that she learned. And then, again, describes her philosophy here. Okay. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about how we actually handle portfolio implementation, give you a sense of where we're at and where we're going. So right now, the way that students create portfolios is through this one credit seminar that I described earlier. This is offered every term, and it meets every other week for 14 weeks, 2 hours at a time, and we can handle up to 15 to 25 students because we've got 2 faculty that are co-teaching this course. The content is, each session is basically broken up into the components of the portfolios that you just saw. So we'll do an introduction on the concepts that we're talking about, how integrative learning is connected to what they're writing, and how each element is going to be developed and what they need to do. And then they spend a majority of the time actually either working as a large group or in pairs or doing individual work. One of the things that we've found really important as part of this process is for peers to give each other feedback through a process called generative listening or generative interviewing. And that's essentially that students choose experiences and then talk about them using the same kind of protocol that I've been describing, this what, so what, now what, what did I get done in this experience? How did it challenge me? What skills did I develop? And how is it going to have an impact on me going forward? And what happens is we ask students then to listen, to hear what the student is saying, but then also listen kind of for the tacit information that the student who's talking does not even articulate or know to articulate. So, and it's really a kind of strengths-based approach. So you're listening to someone's story and you're really trying to reflect back to them, here are the skills that I hear you developing or using. These are these are values that are clearly important to you. I can imagine a future in which you are doing X, Y, or Z. So it also, what I really love about that process is that it also trains people on just really how to listen actively and in an appreciative manner. And then we also do individual consultations in the class and outside of class. So that's the current format. What we're trying to do now is scale this from 15 to 25 students to 300 students a year. And so we're faced with a challenge of scale, obviously. We, the easy option would be to hire 30 faculty to just teach a portfolio class to each teach 15 students, but we know that's clearly impossible to do. And so this is the point at which we're trying to leverage technology and really mine some of the peer facilitation activities and exercises that we've just been doing naturally in this class so that we can actually scale up. I'm sorry, I forgot to say that right now what we're using for technology is we've been using an in-house software program that is developed by Michigan, but we have switched this term to Google Sites because it's just a lot easier for students to use in order to build their own websites. It has its own built-in technical support, and we don't actually have to do a whole lot of work. We've developed a couple of video tutorials for students to watch. It definitely has its pros in that way, but we haven't been able to figure out how we'll be using that tool in order to collect data on student content and analyze it. And so we're still in the process of figuring out if we actually need to use some kind of assessment software. There are a lot of ePortfolio platforms, but they're also very limited in the kinds of options they provide students in terms of design and that kind of thing. So we're really stuck in that process right now, trying to figure out how to move forward. So the way that we have planned, a pilot that we're starting this fall to scale up, is to take the same concept, the integrative seminar, but offer it. So let me just actually go to the next point here. Okay. We're going to offer these two integrative learning seminars, one at the end of somebody's foundation experience and one at the end of their advanced coursework. We've got 3 tracks of students. We've got an advanced standing group that just start at the advanced level, and then we've got a 16-month and a 20-month program. So we have to not only sequence the seminars for different students, but we have to sequence them depending on track. But what's common is that anyone who's taken foundation will take an integrative learning seminar at the end of that foundation, and then again at the end of advanced. And we'll use that as the place. It won't be a content. It won't be a content-specific class. It'll be a class that is designed to integrate the content from other courses and field experiences. And we'll start with developing a portfolio in the first seminar and then have them finish it in the second seminar. And that will be like a 3-credit class in total. So they'll do a 1-credit and then a 2-credit class. In order to support this process, what we want to do is not just house portfolio content and portfolio thinking into just the seminar, but actually work with faculty to develop assignments in their own courses throughout the foundation and in the advanced coursework, and in the field, I should say, where they also do writing reflections, that prompt students to be articulating the kinds of things that they would be doing in their portfolios, but along the way. So basically, we're trying to tag, the touch points in the curriculum where students can keep track, essentially, of what they're doing and not lose a lot of the insights that they're having. So we're thinking of that both as a matter of process, but we're also now trying to think about technology that we can use. So is there, we're thinking, do we need to develop a technological platform for students to be able to log in at the end of a day in the field and type up a reflection, save that somewhere, and then be able to refer to it at the end of the semester as they're summarizing what they learned. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about right now. Additionally, we've got, we have an idea about how the seminar is going to work. So we're really going to take the seminar we're doing and kind of scale it up, but also make it manageable so that we don't scale up the number of instructors all that much. So what we're imagining for the class setting is that we teach the broad concepts in large group settings and then divide people into groups. And we're likely going to divide people into groups by their method areas. Our program has 4 methods: interpersonal practice, community organizing, management, and social policy and evaluation. And so we're trying to decide, so some of the questions we're trying to decide is, do we put everybody in one method in the same class, or can we divide people up by method, or should we mix it up and have the micro folks learn from the macro folks and vice versa? So these are some of the considerations as we're thinking about scaling. In order to also handle that scale, we think that we need to be considering a hybrid model, some kind of online and in-person model where we develop actual online video tutorials and other kinds of learning modules that deliver some of the kind of static concept that we would otherwise deliver in a lecture. And maybe even create modules where students can go through a series of prompts and actually generate content in the moment. And then we're also trying to think of portfolio development because portfolio development is really a process of assessing your own experiences throughout the program. We're thinking about how it connects to cohort development. We have a large program with so many different options and certificates and special studies, and that we know that students sometimes feel like they don't actually know a lot of other people because they're not really with the same people for any more than one class. So we're trying to consider ways in which from orientation to graduation, how do we develop community through this self-reflexive process. So how might we take a cohort at orientation and have people get together, get to know each other, and then continue to meet throughout the program as part of these integrative learning seminars in order to generate their content for their portfolio and learn from each other. Feedback is another major issue as we think about scaling, because again, if we're not going to continue to hire at the ratio of 1 faculty member for every 20 students, we're trying to figure out how students are going to get feedback. This is we're just at the point of thinking through this, so we're not quite sure how this is going to work, but we're hoping that through a combination of the in-class instructor, but also maybe staffing throughout the school, whether it's the faculty who are already assigned as advisors, people who are being developed as peer mentors, so second-year students mentoring first-year students, graduate students and staff in the Career Center who already do this kind of work to help students with resume building and job interviewing and networking, to be able to roll the portfolio in as part of that process, since it is so connected to them developing themselves professionally. Another idea that has come up is to actually tap into our alumni network, because we know that there are a number of alumni both locally and outside of the state who are interested in staying connected to the program. And because it's a portfolio that's online, we're thinking this is an opportunity to be able to share, to be able to connect students and alumni in ways that don't necessarily, that don't require in-person communication, but that could be done remotely, asynchronously, or even synchronously through Skype, where somebody shows a portfolio to a social work practitioner out in San Francisco, and which of course is not local for us. I forgot I'm in Michigan, and you're all there, but so that there can be a process of feedback, and that basically how does the development of portfolios and how do portfolios of products lend themselves to accessing a much larger and more distributed population. And finally, again, I'm sorry, hold on, I apologize. Right, okay, I already talked about that point about infusing content throughout the curriculum. So I just wanted to point out a couple of things that I think are beneficial for us in this future model. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but one of the things we're already seeing, so this is not just about the future model, but one of the things we're already seeing is that the portfolio process has had a really rich impact, incredible impact on the few students who have gotten to participate. We hear everything from students saying, I came in as a micro person, but after I realized how much I learned in my macro class or my macro field placement, I've switched my specialization. I'm going to do a totally different kind of social work than I expected. Or students who go into their next class and say, I get now why I'm taking this class. This is important to me for this reason because I had to think about this before. It also seems to change the way that they think about, even if they stay within a specialization, the kinds of environments they want to work in, or the kinds of roles that they expect to have. So it seems to have a lot of influence on students in a positive way. Students talk a lot about how much they want to be able to understand why they're learning, what they're learning, and how it's going to relate to their social work practice. And we have faculty, some of whom are social workers, some of whom aren't, and they come at things in a wonderful way. It's a mosaic, but they come at things from very different places. So, for instance, the faculty that don't necessarily practice social work every day or who haven't practiced have develop a class around theory, and students, if they aren't really engaging with why that theory matters or why it's connected to their future practice, sometimes get frustrated. And so the portfolio process really does allow students to say, okay, how does this matter to me professionally? So this portfolio program has allowed us both to work with students to help them understand how to make connections between their academic work and their practice, but it's also providing an opportunity for me as the faculty development person on the staff to talk to faculty about, what are your assignments that you give? Why are those valuable? What is it that you think a student is going to get for their practice from that assignment? Why do you think it's important? In order for them to then craft assignments that make that kind of learning more explicit. So it's been very useful in terms of just changing some of the practices within the courses. We are thinking of this as kind of a quality improvement plan, and it's help as we think about how our sequencing in our curriculum looks right now. We're finding that the portfolio content is allowing us to see, just how much students are learning in what places. So we don't have a lot of portfolios to look at right now, so this is more prospective, right, than what's current, but we're hoping that we'll see some of the gaps and some of the strengths in our curriculum and where we can kind of move things around. We also, because we're going to put so much emphasis on having students connect their coursework and their fieldwork, we would really like to see how much that is actually happening in the courses and in the field itself, how much that conversation is happening based on how students make sense of it in the integrative learning seminar, for instance. And finally, this is, as I mentioned, of course, helping us prepare for reaffirmation. We'd like to use the portfolios and the faculty rating of the portfolios as one of our primary measures for our self-study due out in 2014 and our site visit in 2015. But as I said before, it's helping us with this continuous quality improvement cycle, as we can say. I mean, it's not the only measure we're using, obviously, but it's going to help us be able to talk about how we're trying to make the students' learning experience have more impact and more relevance, and how it's going to help us shape the way that we change our curriculum going forward. So the last thing on this future model is these are some of the goals that we have, or some of the things that we've really come to learn as lessons. That when you have a portfolio course, it's a kind of one-off siloed experience. You know, you take a student 14 weeks and you say, what did you learn your first semester, your second semester, et cetera? Where are you going now? As we think about portfolios as a kind of program-wide and program-long experience, we have to really think about students' educational development, their developmental processes. So when are students really able to articulate a philosophy, and when do they actually need to come back and write it again, and when do they come back and write it again, and at what points are they able to make what kind of meaning? So this is a real experiment for us here. It's really important that for us to keep talking about the process and not necessarily just the product. I mean, the term portfolio is somewhat of a misnomer for us in the sense that it really identifies the end product, but it's the process that we have seen that's having such an impact. As I write here, when students are able to reflect, and at multiple points, they're able to make critical shifts in what they choose to study or how they're entering their field practice. When they reflect on their field placement in the first semester and they write about it and they document it, they're able to then take that into their second semester, and it's not lost information. So we try to make sure that people understand the process. From a professional development standpoint, it's also been extremely helpful for students to be able to walk in to a job interview and just say, here's what I know about myself, here's what I can offer you. And even if an employer never looks at the product, the student is extremely well informed and prepared for a situation like that. So that's actually probably been our number one kudo, I guess, is that students feel ultimately much more prepared for getting a job. We're also finding it really important to, if we're going to scale to a program-wide, program-long kind of process with portfolios, that everybody needs to know what's happening. So the foundation faculty need to understand exactly what students are doing in the integrative learning seminar. The advanced faculty need to know what they're doing. How do their assignments potentially link up to how students create portfolios? How do the people out in the field, and we have hundreds and hundreds of field instructors, how do they get information about what students are doing? How can they support that process? How do people who are doing academic advising and career planning know about the portfolio process and how it, and supporting students throughout the process? And then also, how does this help our Office of Student Services in recruiting new MSW students? What is this? What about this program might attract prospective students because it's a feature that they might really enjoy? And so we have to kind of think about, before people even get here, all the way to when they graduate, and make sure that we have a kind of clear message about what portfolio learning and what portfolio development is. So the last couple of slides I have here are just some examples I just wanted to give, somewhat redundant, so I'll go through them quickly. But this is an assignment that I use. It's really actually kind of just a generic template that then we use with faculty and in the field for them to modify. So the idea here is there are these, you pick a time of engagement or challenge in any particular experience. It could be in your placement, it could be in a course, it could be out neither of those. And the idea is, the questions are, what were you doing? What was your responsibility? What skills, what kind of work did you do? What skills did you use? What impact did that experience have? And how is that going to, how do you see your values running through that? And how do your goals get shaped? So we basically have taken this template, and I go to different faculty and ask them, is there an assignment that you do in your class where you know that the value of the assignment is that it's really going to help them prepare for practice in this particular particular way. Could we come up with a way to attach these questions or embed these questions into a discussion or into the actual assignment? And so some faculty have come up with different ways to do that. So for the very first course on Intro to Macro Theory, a faculty member took this and said, okay, I think at this point, students are going to be able, in this assignment, they're taking a social problem and applying a macro perspective to it. And so Professor Garrow said, I think that at that point, they're really young, they're really early in the program. I think what they can answer is, what have you learned that you didn't know, and how might this be useful later? So it's kind of simplified. They may not be the students may not be thinking they're developing lots of skills because maybe they're doing a lot of reading and it doesn't necessarily connect to them as like professional practice, but for them just to stop and say, what did you learn and how might it be useful? We hope that becomes then a foundation for them to take into their integrated seminar and say, okay, tell me all of the things that you learned in all of the courses that you took and how you thought those would influence your future practice. And now let's talk about that and start developing an early working portfolio. Another example is from methods from an evaluation course. And this faculty member took the assignment and was able to kind of implement more of the nitty gritty, how was this assignment useful? How did this affect your field placement? What skills did you develop? What lessons you learned? And what challenges did you face? I think that was, yeah. So that's the presentation. I put my contact info here, and then I just added these two examples. These are the websites that I showed you. Those are just links to those two websites. I apologize. Let me get back to that slide. And I just put some references that we've used to shape the syllabus and as we think about these integrative learning portfolios. I'm happy to look and gather other information if anybody is interested. But I can end there and take any questions or discussion points.
Unmuted. All right, so are there any questions from the room here in Fresno?
I had a question. I had a question on let's see, where was it? Something about faculty measures, I think. So I was wondering, did that mean a faculty measure for the assessment of the portfolio? And what does that look like? Is that like a rubric or?
Right. I gotcha. Let me go back to that slide. Yeah, so we are, what we know from CSWE is that what we were told was in terms of using portfolios specifically for measurement, that the messages that we got about portfolios were essentially that that's considered a self-reporting measure, much like an alumni survey or a foundation, an incoming survey. And so the way that we would have to really promote the notion that a portfolio was a rigorous document, that was evaluated and given feedback, to students by faculty, was that we would actually have to have it graded. So so the rating, yeah, it is a grade, and we're now in the process of figuring out what that rubric would look like. How would we? It's a challenge to figure out how do you develop a rubric for? I mean, everything is subjective, but this is highly subjective, and so we haven't gotten that far yet. But to answer your question in brief, yeah, we are developing a rubric for faculty to look at the actual content. We have a number of other measures in place because we're not sure that we can consider this to be a primary measure just yet, but that's our plan.
Urmila, this is Stephen. I wanted to ask if you could speak a little bit about, we've talked about that these are electronic portfolios that you're using in a more traditional classroom environment, that these aren't for necessarily online degrees or online courses. Could you talk a little bit about the process of introducing these technologies into the face-to-face classroom?
Sure. I'll answer the question and let me know if I didn't quite answer it. In terms of the technology, up till now we were not using Google. Like I said, we were using a homegrown platform. We use Sakai. We use like the University of Michigan's instance of Sakai, if anyone's familiar with Sakai. And so the open source portfolio team had developed a platform that is being used by a number of institutions. It's a little bit of a complicated platform. So we had to do a lot of tech support where we had to develop online tutorials, written resources, and then show up and take up to an hour of class time. I would, in my old job, that's what I would do, is I'd go to these different courses and teach students how to use the portfolio. We'd walk through and develop one together. Having switched to Google in this term, it's become almost totally self-sufficient because Google has its own set of tools for using Google Sites. And we have somebody in the library who created a couple of videos. It was kind of a one-time investment of getting somebody on staff to create some tutorials, how to create a portfolio, how to add images, and all that. And then we send out, we have a website where you can, click on tutorials, and then we created a portfolio template. So it's basically a homegrown, it's like a pre-created portfolio template that students then save for themselves. I'm just going to see if I could find it here, but the students then save for themselves and then modify. So it's almost totally hands-off at this point in terms of tech support. Does that answer the question that you were looking for?
Yeah, definitely. Could you speak a little bit as well to the perspective for faculty who are teaching face-to-face, who are now introducing this into their teaching?
Yeah, so the way that we're planning to handle it is that there will likely, unless a faculty is really interested in teaching the integrative seminar, or if a faculty member is interested in helping students create their own portfolios within his or her class, we're housing it in the integrative seminar alone, so that faculty's minimum responsibility would be to help students actually just develop the written content and kind of highlight, like, this is an artifact that you're developing. We're going to have you write a one-page reflection, so at the end of this term it could go into your portfolio when you take the seminar. And then we're planning to kind of keep all of the technical, the tech support and the technical stuff, the technical teaching, all of that in the integrative seminar space. And even in that, like I said with Google, we're just planning to give people a link to the tutorial and then have them create it on their own. We'll probably end up hiring a grad student or a work study who's on staff, maybe 10 hours a week, to do like office hours for students that want to come in and get support. But I know that in my previous experience, I found that students don't even use office hours in that way for tech support. Our library system happens to offer support for this for Google anyway, so that's good. But even if they didn't, as long as there's somebody on staff who can kind of answer questions through email, we found that even setting aside 10 hours of a staff person's time doesn't really work well for, and especially not in an MSW program where people are coming in at all hours, but sometimes they're not in the building because they're out in the field 3 days a week. So Google and programs like Google have been very useful for us to really offload the support, to create a kind of self-directed tech support, and so that the faculty themselves don't even have to honestly learn the program. Where it will become an issue that we haven't figured out yet is at the point of evaluation. So in Google, for instance, in Google Sites, you can look at a page and you can write a comment, as you would like if you were blogging. And so a faculty member could technically write a comment there. A student could get the comment, be able to see it, and then hide or delete the comment when they want to make the portfolio totally public. But it doesn't necessarily address issues of saving feedback or having a record, being able to timestamp a website to say, this was due in December, we want to see where it was in November. At November, this is what it looked like. I'm not sure. We're going to have to figure out how is this going to work on the evaluation end of things. This particular tool, like I said, there's a lot of software out there for ePortfolio use for assessment, and that they're really robust. But right now we want to go with Google just because Michigan is developing a relationship to Google and they're giving this whole thing to us for free right now. So it does raise a lot of questions in terms of the faculty, not on the tech support side, but more on the kind of the evaluation side.
All right, well, I don't see anything coming in. So thank you, Urmila.
Oh, you're so welcome. What a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for participating today.
Thank you.